Um, Let me say, first of all, with a very slight disclaimer, I teach FSU affairs at Georgetown University, but I also do some consulting with a group called IHS. And I have borrowed some slides from IHS. My team has been working on Ukrainian energy very intensively, as you can imagine, as you all have this year. And consequently, I'm using these, so I'm wearing my IHS hat today. The second disclaimer, which goes along with the first, is that while the slides are borrowed from our recent research, the conclusions that I'm going to draw from them, the inferences, are very much my own, not those of IHS. And in fact, IHS might well disagree with some of them. So these are strictly on my own Otsibyatina, I guess is the right word. So let me begin with some key points, because I brought a number of slides, and I'm going to zip through those slides very quickly in order to meet the time requirement and not encroach on anyone else's time. So I'll begin with what you might call the главные тезисы, so that you see at a glance where I'm going with all of this. The first is the general setting. Ukraine inherits, as we've all been saying, the Soviet legacy in all its aspects, and one of those is the energy legacy, extremely inefficient energy consumption. That remains the case 20 years after independence, and although there has been, in fact, considerable progress. So it's the position on the football field, but it's also the direction, the movement of the ball that are both relevant here. This is particularly true in the area of consumption of natural gas, where Ukraine has cut back substantially its reliance on natural gas, and at the same time, by the same token, its reliance on Russian gas, which is very important here, and we'll come back to that. That's the good news. Unfortunately, there's also bad news, and the bad news is that much of that improvement in gas consumption has come in the industrial sector. The hard core of inefficient use is the residential and the heating, and there's not been much progress there. So one of the big questions for the new government and its friends is going to be whether one can actually make progress on that front. Unfortunately, it'll be slow. You've got to rebuild the whole heating sector. The other bit of bad news is that much of the progress in reducing natural gas consumption by industry has taken place by means of substituting coal for natural gas, particularly in the East. And we know now that there are coal problems with coal and problems with the railroads to bring coal. What that's going to mean this winter and for the near term is that Ukraine is going to be even more dependent on natural gas. To some extent, the progress of recent years is being reversed by recent events. So how is Ukraine going to get through the winter? And really, there's a fork in the road here. Either there's a deal or there's no deal, or maybe there is a deal, but it doesn't work. So let's look at that and see what the issues are in Oh, I'm sorry. I'm working from two different, sorry. Right. I have to remember to do two things here. All right, I'm going to show a few slides to make a couple key points. One is that the gas consumption is concentrated in the East, and that turns out to be a very important point. Most of the storage, however, is in the West. Very awkward. And in between, you have a pipeline system, which runs, unfortunately, from east to west. In other words, in the wrong direction. So this has a number of implications. I'm going to skip what you're seeing here and go straight to the slides. But at the end of what I have to say, I want to leave you with some very interesting good news, which is that if you add together all of these trends that I'm talking about, if we get through the winter, if we get through next winter, if we get through the winter after that, beginning 5 years from now, you're going to see something amazing happen. The inherited Russian-Ukrainian gas problem is going to disappear. And so I will leave you with that last slide in just a moment. So. First, just the quick numbers on the energy intensity. You can see in comparative perspective, Ukraine is way up there, along with other legacy states of the former Soviet Union. And although there's been progress, Ukraine is still very much an outlier. However, if you look at the progress that's been made, particularly in gas consumption, you can see that it's been a steady downward trend. And this wasn't just during the era when GDP was collapsing. It was also during the era when GDP was recovering. And yet, gas consumption was still going down. We have, in particular, the Russians to thank for that. Dear old Gazprom, which was raising its prices, and industry was responding by consuming less gas. Economics really does work, even in Russia and even in Ukraine. The impact of high prices you can see here. Of course, in a sense, there was no reason why Russia should be giving Ukraine gas at bargain basement prices. Clearly, there was a price for this beyond the price of the gas. And so in a sense, what we're moving toward now is a more commercial and more transparent relationship. That has to be considered a good thing. Here is more on the subject of gas consumption in decline so that you can see that trend clearly. But the big question is whether it'll continue now that the big gains have been made in industry and the tough nut remains, which is the housing and the heating sector. So the hardest part actually begins now. These are some of the numbers on the household sector. Probably the single most important program that one should be pointing to is precisely programs of aid to rebuild the whole heating sector. It's not just a matter of weak Ukrainian governments granting subsidized prices to a resistant population. There's a technological issue here. There's an infrastructural issue. You've got to rebuild a whole antiquated system. That will take a long time. Now, bring in the coal factor. A good deal of the progress made in recent years was precisely substituting coal for gas. And coal has now become the largest single source of energy, primary energy in Ukraine. Problem with the military action in the east this summer, a lot of the mines have been closed. They may never reopen. One might add to that that they should never reopen because they were some of the worst coal mines in the world. And they operated only on subsidies from the Kiev government, which is also interesting. Then, somehow, strangely, the rebels managed to destroy railroads, but not gas pipelines. I wonder why that happened. But in any case, a lot of the railroads that would bring the coal to the industrial users have also been knocked out of commission. So this substitution of coal for gas that has been so important a part of the story in the East in recent years is suddenly disrupted. And here you can see the problem in more specifics, how much of the coal production is concentrated in the East, and the problem for the rest of the country is getting the coal even to users within the East and also to some extent to the center itself. People have been asking about this gas deal, and frankly, I don't know what's in the gas deal, and I don't think anyone else does either who's not been actually at the table. What I can tell you, however, is that the two sides have been locked in disputes, of course, in one level for 25 years, but more specifically since the gas agreement in 2009. The Ukrainians are saying, look, this agreement was extracted from us under duress. We reject it. We want a new gas agreement. And the right price is $2.85. Gazprom has been saying, no, 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 this is a perfectly decent agreement. It looks like any other European gas contract. And by the way, they're right on that point, technically. And the right price is $4.85. To you, because we're nice guys, $3.85. And you get the sense of how we have now gotten into the bargaining phase. Once you're only a few $1 billion apart, in principle, you should be able to close. So maybe that's what we're seeing today. The question is, where's that extra $1 billion or $2 billion going to come from? The Ukrainians don't have it. The IMF says we're not in that business. The gas companies in Europe are saying we're not in the charity business. It's not clear yet who's going to pay for the gas that Gazprom wants in advance for its gas deal. We can talk more about that. The gas consumption, however, is also concentrated in the East. And if Eastern industry has been disrupted, that means they need less fuel. So there is good news attached to the bad news. But there are also some other implications, and those are, if there is no deal, how do you get gas to the East? And let's focus on, I'll skip over this because you can see the same point in this map. The transmission lines run through Ukraine, east to west. So the problem is that while you can bring gas in by reverse flow into the west, you can't easily get it to the, in fact, you can't get it to the east. You can't even get it to Kiev. So there's a real problem in actually supplying Kiev. So what does all of this imply? In actual fact, as far as gas is concerned, there are three Ukraines. There's the east, there's the center, and there's the west. The west can be supplied from Europe. The capacity is there. Money is an issue, but you can supply the west. But that's not where the consumption is. You can supply the east because the Russians presumably won't let their friends down. And so there will be special deals. Maybe there's a new job for Dmytro Firtash and other intermediaries from his current residence in Vienna. The center is the problem. The center is the problem. You have a hard time getting gas there. You have a hard time getting coal there. Kiev, the consumption in Kiev is very largely the loss-making part of the business, and so Kiev is going to be the problem. Meanwhile, you see the dependence on Russian gas going down. By the way, the navy blue is gas from Turkmenistan, but they're out of the game because that gas is going to China, much to Gazprom's amazement. And so what is declining is not just the dependence on Russian gas. What is declining is also the dependence on Russian transit through Ukraine. As you see here, the Russians for 20 years have been bypassing Ukraine. They bypassed Ukraine with Yamal Europe, with Nord Stream, with Blue Stream, and now South Stream. The question I will leave with you is, what is in fact Europe's best interest here? Should South Stream go forward? It is the key to ending the perennial problem. How about Ukrainian gas? Notice how much of it comes from Kharkiv. So Henrik, where are you? Kharkiv is going to have a new future as the place where the next generation of Ukrainian gas may come from. All kinds of opportunities for the local oligarchy. Something to steal, finally. And finally, my last slide, I'll close with this one. Here's the good news. If you add together all of these trends, the declining gas consumption in Ukraine itself, the declining reliance on Russian gas, the declining Russian dependence on Ukrainian transit, the contribution, not right away, as you said, but sooner or later from nuclear power, and a few other things besides, by 2005 and at the latest, by 2015, no, sorry, back up. I hope you have an edit function on this. By 2020, this problem will start to fade away. 10 years from now, it'll be gone. Thank you very much.